The mood in the country as we wait for that dreaded Wednesday, the 19th of July 2023, is very clear. That mood, that atmosphere in the country is something called fear. Clearly, what is happening here is that the Kenya Kwanza government is very successfully selling fear to Kenyans. Talk to anybody in the country. Ask them about Wednesday. Look at the initial reaction and you will see fear. Now, in my opinion, we all need to ignore those people trying to put fear into us for one very simple reason. And indeed, we even have a situation in the country where people are predicting funeral dates for people who are still alive. Now, the reason why we need to totally ignore this is in a brief story I want to tell you. In January 2022, a month that I will not easily forget, when our patient was being admitted into hospital, there was another patient who had been dumped at the gate and left for dead. I mean, that other patient was very sick, barely alive. Even the doctors who looked at her, expert doctors who do this every day, all agreed, this one, there's no way they'll make it. Yeah, but let's just try our best. Well, this woman who had been left for dead by people who wanted to take over her property and were anxious for her to die quickly, survived. She walked out of that hospital much better and within weeks had fully recovered. Well, you all know what happened with our patient. They walked into that hospital themselves. They were not thrown in. They were in much better health than this other patient, but they didn't make it. My point is, instead we need to fear the one who holds our breath in his hands, Almighty God, who I think is laughing when people like Moses Kuria make the kind of tweets they make, predicting the demise of others, the funeral of other people. My strong advice, reserve your fear only for Almighty God, the one who can still deal with you even after that death. That is the one to fear. And what is more, we have seen in this life, people who have predicted the end of others have ended up leaving our planet much earlier than those they predict over. So with that information, we all need to ignore the fearmongers. And we also need to understand their motive for selling fear, which is rather obvious. When people are afraid, hopefully they'll not come out to demonstrate. When people are afraid, they are much easier to control. When people are afraid, things will not get out of hand the way it's looking in motherland Kenya. But having said that, let us also address the question, would there be any reason for fear? Is fear justified this coming week as Azimio ramp up demonstrations to 3 times a week, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday? Is there reason to fear? And if there is, where is the real threat that should cause us to fear coming from? Is it coming from Azimio and Raila Odinga? Or is it coming from William Ruto and Kenya Kwanza? Or shall I say, and his close lieutenants? Again, let me answer that question with a story. During the last Mandamanos, in my home constituency of Kadiani, there were demonstrations at the market, Kadiani market. Some Azimio leaders were there, including Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka. And the crowd was huge. And they walked around the area, protesting venting over their frustrations in the country called Kenya. And then it ended up with that major meeting where there were thousands in attendance. And that episode ended peacefully. And everybody went home. Now here's the super fascinating fact that came out here. What happened to the business people? Did they close their shops and rush home? What happened to the mama mbogas? Were they scared? Actually, the very opposite happened. There was a large crowd. Mama mbogas sold like never before. The businesses in the area did booming business. Yeah, because the crowd got thirsty. The crowd got hungry. The crowd saw something they could get in the market. And all of them did booming business. And of course there was police presence. Yeah, and the police did their job. They just observed. And of course their presence was a deterrent to any thugs in the crowd, any people of poor character in the crowd, who may have wanted to do something, yeah, break the law. And there was something else fascinating that happened. After that very successful demonstration in my home constituency of Kadiani, the police in the area were threatened by their bosses. How could you allow that meeting to take place? How could you allow those demonstrations? What? This is a very clear indication of what the instructions to the police are from the William Ruto regime. And those instructions are: demonstrations are illegal. In other words, without the knowledge of Kenyans, somebody has suspended the Constitution. That's really what it is. Please allow me to tell you another story, yeah, as we take this argument forward, of what really happened at Mlolongo, yeah, last Wednesday. Demonstrators were peaceful. Indeed, the demonstrations hadn't really started. They hadn't really picked up. And then something happened. A border rider was shot by police. He was unarmed. He had done nothing. And of course, his colleagues and the people in Mlolongo reacted in a very predictable manner. They lost it and confronted the police, who only made matters worse by heightening the tension. It all looked very deliberate. Indeed, it all looked like it was very well and carefully choreographed. Because meanwhile, there was another group just waiting next to the expressway. And on cue, the group of young men marched towards the expressway, yeah, almost like soldiers, and started destroying it. Clearly, very well coordinated, very well choreographed, something that was organized. And so if anybody wants to get scared or have fear, it is very clear who they should fear. They should fear the Kenya Kwanza government, not even the people of Kenya. Because from those stories I've told you, it should be very clear what is happening in our country. Because we have a lot of propaganda flying left, right and center. And sometimes it is easy to swallow this propaganda. And so the question must be, will this tactic of fear work on the Kenyan people? Will it stop the demonstrations? Good question. And the answer is a resounding no. And bila kizungu mingi, the reason is very simple. Let's go back into human nature, the basics. What is it that drowns, removes all fear from a human being? Since the beginning of time, it is hunger, desperation, loss of hope. Now the problem is that we have too many Kenyans within the country who fall into that category just now. Yeah, millions of them. And so, this clever tactic by Kenya Kwanza, very well thought out, and they showed us how well organized they can be in the last demonstrations, will fail because it has ignored human nature. I mean, when you're desperate, when life is so hard for you, life is so difficult for you, fear of death takes a back seat. And we have seen this all over the world. Remember the Arab Spring? Remember Sudan? What happened? Just young people brought down a very powerful, brutal dictator called Bashir. The case studies are endless. And that is precisely where we are in Kenya. And of course, when it fails, it would seem that some people will go for the military option, martial law. The possibility of this happening is becoming more and more likely by the day. Because if Kenya Kwanza continues with their tactics, then what is most likely going to happen is that the violence is going to escalate. The protests are going to escalate and get out of hand. And therefore, one of the few options that will be left to them, apart from negotiating with Raila Odinga and Azimio, who clearly represent the people, both the people in Azimio and the people not in Azimio, even people who voted for UDA, clearly currently are being represented by Azimio. If they don't choose that option, then the other option will have to be the military. Now, we've already seen how the bipartisan talks failed. And so it is safe to assume that Kenya Kwanza are not the negotiating type. They're not the people to sit down and talk. We've already seen evidence of this. And of course, on Wednesday, matters will be made a lot more worse. If Kenya Kwanza makes good the threat of arresting or even putting under house arrest as a Azimio leader, Raila Amolo Odinga. Now, I read a very interesting comment right here on this channel by somebody who said it is okay, they can try to arrest Raila, but the first problem will be finding him. That Mzee is very slippery. And I agree. Also based on what has happened in the past. When Raila was fighting the second liberation, many times it was very difficult for authorities to locate exactly where he is or where he was at that time. But still, in my view, such a move would be a fatal mistake. It would be a grave mistake. It would not work in the interests of Kenya Kwanza. And this very desperate attempt they have to protect their presidency. It doesn't matter how they got it. They must protect it by all means possible. And so arresting Odinga, in my opinion, will not serve those interests. In fact, it will go counter against them ever meeting that objective which they are so determined to meet and achieve. But I have a nagging question for the Kenya Kwanza leadership. Do they realize that their statements, what they're saying in public, their tweets, what they're posting on social media, are actually provoking Kenyans? Do they realize that? Do they realize that their utterances, rather than cooling down the situation, is making matters worse? Which is the very opposite of what a government should do. Because a government must always be a calming factor in a country. That is the role of a government. But when the government is at the forefront of provoking the people, what do you expect will happen? What do you expect? The road they have opened and are running down that very road they have opened of provoking the people. Where do you imagine it will land? Definitely not in a good place, especially for Kenya Kwanza. We continue with the current offer on this channel. For 1 year subscription to my weekly intelligence briefings, you can see details on your screens right now. Or if you want that very fascinating, valuable set of videos on how to cope and maybe even prosper in a dead economy like what we're facing, the offer also for that one is only $5.99. So you should take your pick. WAB, $5.99 or 599 shillings. Or you can opt to pay the same for the sets of videos. If you want both, then it is $5.99 times 2, which is still an amazing offer for some very valuable content. And I'm sure especially those who are waiting for WAB 111, who are greatly anticipating it and are not yet subscribers, should jump and grab this opportunity, which should end in the next few hours. Okay, so rush to make sure that you're not left out. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.